to you.
Welcome, everyone. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces and names. So we are extremely happy to have all of you here today for another quarterly RINGO community gathering. So thanks to all of you for joining us. We know we all have seriously busy schedules. So the intention of this gathering basically is to continue to nurture this community that we've built, to connect, to continue to work together, to bring changes, fundamental changes to the global civil society and the broader development and humanitarian ecosystem in which we all work and are passionate about. And also to bring to sharp focus the work that we are doing as part of RINGO and what we've committed to. So today, our focus will be on participatory grant making and philanthropy. And so today, we're going to have the opportunity to have our colleagues share their perspectives on the work that they've been doing on participatory grant making. Our particular focus in this area as RINGO has been to disrupt and to shift patterns of power and to look at what works within grant-making relationships. And so, like I said earlier, one of the RINGO innovation teams has worked on this for almost a year. And today they're going to showcase the results of the work that they have done. We also want to know what others are also doing in the wider ecosystem around this area. So we've invited a special guest, Diana Samrasan, hope I pronounced the name well, who my colleague Jim will introduce properly a little later. At RINGO, like we all know, because we've been part of this process, and many of us on this call have been part of this process, we love to create community. We are experimenting with different things and different formats in these community gatherings. So we are looking forward to getting feedback on your experiences with this specific community gathering that we are having today. So before we dive in or before we dig into what we're going to do today, we would love to get a sense of your experiences. So my colleague, Catherine, is going to share a Menti poll, a link in the chat. So Catherine, if you can share the link, the Menti link, excellent. And if you all can click on that link, it has two questions. The first question is, do you practice participatory grant making? And it has some multiple choice options there. Yes, no, I don't really know what PGM is. It would be great if Catherine, if you could project to see the results of that. If you can screen share as the results come in. Excellent. Just wait for a couple of minutes for everybody to make their choice. Does your organization practice participatory grant making? Thank you, Akanimo, for resharing the link for those of us who just joined us. Thank you, Sparkle. I think we're still getting more responses. The responses are growing. Excellent. So just one more minute to get responses.
Hello.
Excellent.
Alors, bonjour.
Okay, I think we now can go on to the second question. So the second question says, what words come to your mind when you think of PGM? What words come to your mind when you think of participatory grant making? What word comes to your mind? So I think this will come out like a word cloud. Thank you for your responses. Okay, the responses are growing. Great. I think the dominant words are collaboration, equity, inclusive or inclusion, partnership, people. I see empowerment, process, consultation, co-creation.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
We've had 150 responses. Awesome. Thank you so much. Somebody on the chat said community driven. So if we can just mute our microphone when we are not speaking, please. Can we mute our microphones, please? Thank you. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for that. That was excellent. So I think we're really ready for this conversation today. And we've set a really great basis or foundation for us to get much more deeper into PGM. But before we get into PGM, there are several things that are happening within RINGO that we want to give updates. So Catherine, if you could just help with and project so we can get into the updates. A lot of things are going on. So I'll just begin quite quickly with updates on our action pods. And so many of us know that this year we have a clear influencing agenda in terms of the stakeholders that we are engaging with. We're engaging with board members and trustees of INGOs, some of the largest INGOs, medium-sized, small-sized, all over the globe. And we are also engaging with institutional funders, the philanthropic foundations, and the bilaterals. So Catherine, next slide, please. So yes, together, we've gone through the 2 years of RINGO phase 1, gone through an inquiry process. We've together developed innovations or prototypes. And one of those prototypes we're going to have a conversation around today on PGM. We've also documented lessons learned. And throughout that process, one of the things that came out was that we needed to focus more intentionally and deliberately on 2 key stakeholders, INGO boards and institutional funders. And so with this phase of RINGO, the body of work that we are doing together is focused on these 2 constituencies. We also recognize that the conversations around systems change, around transforming development policy and practice is often not emphasized at the board level. We do recognize that these conversations are actually happening, usually within senior management and certain policy spaces, but at the board level, it's often overlooked. So one of the things we are doing this year is targeting board members through an action pod process, bringing together board representation from some of the largest INGOs around the world, and not only the largest, but some of the smaller, middle-sized, in the various thematics: social justice, humanitarian, environmental, etc. And so we are creating a space for experimentation, exploration. We're creating a space and an opportunity for people to come together to influence the system. Next slide, please. So some of the issues that we're responding to, if we could mute our microphones, please. Thank you. Some of the issues that we'll be responding to during the board action pod is to look at systemic inequalities, to look at how INGOs can balance the impact that they want to make versus empowering their national and local partners. How do you achieve the right balance and respond to issues of localization, decolonization, locally led leadership, etc.? How INGOs can be more strategic in terms of shaping strategy participation. How do they ensure they get the multitude of voices to participate in shaping their strategy, in shaping the way they work with their partners, in making sure that at the center of the work that they do is driven by the communities and their partners, and also looking at how to redefine global solidarity. So to look at the whole issue of solidarity and what it means now within these very turbulent times, and what role can members of INGO boards and trustees, what role they can play in shaping global solidarity. So see, these are some of the issues that we'll be discussing during the board action pod, but not only these issues, but of course, other issues of relevance that relate to what I just highlighted on. Next slide, please, Catherine. So in terms of the format of the board action pod, we are looking at making sure that the process is co-created. So what we are doing is having onboarding calls, basically trying to get everybody's input into how the process should evolve. We're going to make sure that there are going to be open discussions, a collaborative environment. We're not going to run away from uncomfortable conversations. So we're going to have robust exchanges and, of course, structured sessions for active engagement. And so it's going to be quite an interesting body of work that we'll be doing with selected board members, or those who have responded to the call to participate in this process. Next slide, Catherine. Thank you. So these are some of the important dates with regards to the board action plan. Yesterday, we had 2 open house sessions. Akenimo referenced it earlier on. We had 2 open house sessions just to provide information about what the process would look like, and it was very well attended. We're having onboarding calls on October 16th and October 24th. We're having our first inception meeting on the November 16th, a workshop next year on February 20th, and another workshop on April 18th. And then, which we have not really selected a date, so we didn't want to highlight that, a RINGO retreat, where we're bringing together members of the board action pod and the funders action pod, national and local organizations, and other constituencies, really to come together to share the learning that has gone through with the process of both the funder action pod and the board action pod. And we are hoping that this meeting will be an in-person meeting. And so at this point, I just want to invite my colleague Jenny just to highlight, give a couple of updates about the funder action pod. Jenny.
Jenny's having some technical issues. She may have to go out and come in again. It won't let her put her camera on or make a sound for some reason.
Let's move to Nancy. Let's hear some updates from Nancy, and then hopefully by the time she's done, Jenny will be ready.
Okay, so let me continue from there. We have started a wonderful initiative as RINGO. One of our key pillars is to hear the voices from the South, which is a major information that we use to facilitate the work of our influencing work. So phase one, we began with the research, voices from the South. We got information from Global South and actors largely how they want to engage with INGOs. So phase two, we've also continued with getting feedback from partners, local, national organization. And we started this in July. Kachini can go on to the next slide. And so far, we've been able to get the voices from 498 organizations who are largely small to medium-sized local national organization in West and Central Africa, across East Africa, Southern Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And we are still waiting to get more voices from all these regions because we want to be very inclusive enough to hear the perspective from national local organization on how they would like INGO boards and funders to work differently. So in our conversations too, with the survey process too, we've also been having focus group discussions. So far, we've had 9 separate focus group discussions across the regions, and we've had over 50 people joining these discussions, sharing their experiences, their perspectives from the work that they are doing, from their partnership relationship with their funders and INGOs that they engage with. And throughout all, they are sharing insights around issues about their resources, issues about solidarity, their partnerships. They are looking at issues around accountability and how measurement and impact is designed with their partners. They've also shared their insights around risk management, the structure and the ways that partners, which are the funders and INGOs that they work with. And in all, what we are taking from these organizations, local national organizations, is for them to share with us how do we share or facilitate to ensure that there is equitable and just relationship between local national organization and international organizations. And these are the messaging that we are hearing from partners to facilitate the influencing work with the Funders Action Pod, with the INGO Action Pod, and also to drive the entire RINGO influencing. Catching the next slide. So the research is still out there. The survey is still out there. We want to hear more voices. So we are asking you to join us to share. You can share with your network, share with your partners that you've worked with to also give us more information. And my colleague Catherine will share the links in the chat. So we have the survey links in different languages. We have in English, we have in French, we have in Spanish, and we have in Portuguese. And we will want to get as many feedback from your partners as possible to help us to know in what ways, in what forms do we work together to ensure that there's just an equitable relationship between INGOs, funders, and organizations across the South. So thank you very much. I don't know if Jenny is back and she can. Great, Jenny. So I'll hand it over to you for you to share more information around the Funders Action Pod.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nancy. And Kat, apologies. Would you mind just going back a few slides? Sorry about that, everyone. Little Zoom glitch. So my name's Jenny, and I'm leading on the work with funders within RINGO. We've been engaging with a whole set of funders for a couple of years now. but we're sort of shifting the way that we're working together and mirroring what Charles described with the INGO board action pod. So just to sort of put it in context, throughout our research, throughout our community process of the social lab of RINGO, funding and funders came out as a really prominent theme. That won't surprise any of you. You know, the observation that the nature of funding has a really profound impact on the shape and form and ways of working of civil society. I think many of us on the call will have felt that. And funders are, of course, already thinking really hard about their role. And there's a whole range of different types of funders, as Charles alluded to earlier. And there's some really progressive thinking in this space, not least on participatory grant making. So we feel like RINGO has some real good insights to offer into this thinking that funders are doing. So this is our intention with the Funder Action Pod. Kat, if you'd go on to the next slide, please. So what are we doing? We are shifting from just sharing our learning as RINGO with funders to actually turning into an action set, if you like. So we've got about 30 really progressive funding change agents from all across the sector who have come together working with us as funding organizations. And we want to provide a really safe space to work together, to learn together, to take risks together. So a lot of those organizations are on their own change journeys. We want to be able to provide peer support from within the Funder Action Pod. And to identify together these barriers, what's stopping progress, what's stopping some of the more helpful ways of funding into civil society to actually help that reimagining of the INGO and of civil society as we intend in RINGO. So we want to test those ideas, we want to test RINGO innovations and concepts, and we want to provide that sort of coaching, facilitation, and creativity together. So that's what's going on. Really exciting work, and we'll keep you posted as we move forward. So that's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I will take it back to Akanimu. Okay.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you, Charles, Jenny, for that update. And there is a question from Alan in the chat box, but I'm encouraging people to put into the chat box your questions and reactions, and we will try and answer them as you go along, rather than having a dedicated time for your questions. Some questions might be easier to respond in the chat box. So please, use the chat box as you see fit. Charles, do you want to take this question on how to take, how will we take into account the legal requirements of INGOs in different jurisdictions?
Animo, I think there's some technical hitches where microphones are suddenly stopping working for some of the presenters. So I think
yes, I'm here. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
So the question is, how will we take into account the legal requirements of INGO governing bodies in the different jurisdictions?
Yeah. So for us, we are inviting participation from, let me put it this way, we are inviting the institutions to send representatives from their boards. And so the way we've done it with the board action pod is that, which is different from the phase one, where people came as individuals, right? We want to make sure that with the board action pod, there's institutional backing. And so we've gone through the formal route of getting in touch with executive directors or the directors and the board chairs, and they having a discussion at that level to then select or have a broader discussion with the board and select a minimum of 2 people, a minimum of 1 person, a maximum of 2 people to participate in that process, right? So that is how we've approached it. And we've approached INGOs based in Europe, in the US, in Indo-Pacific areas. Some have had head offices in the Global South. Also in Latin America, if any, etc. So that's how we have approached it. We've not really been looking at the legal requirements or how they are set up. That has not necessarily been the focus of our selection. The focus of our selection has been interest to participate, but also whether internally they are also interested or have been having conversations around systems change and how they want to work differently with their partners so that they find the process relevant for their own internal changes. But beyond that, we also contribute to changing the wider system. I hope I've been able to answer the question.
Thanks, Charles. We are moving directly into the PGM stuff now, given that was the main focus of this community gathering. And I will invite Jim in to host this session.
Thank you very much, and thanks to colleagues for the very wonderful updates on what has been going on so far and what lies ahead for all of us in this community. Yes, participatory grant making, one of those working spaces that emerged from the very start of the RINGO process, where thought leaders who think alike saw the need to reflect and test, what it means like to actually find a common way to pull resources together and drive a common agenda together. And as one of the prototypes of the RINGO community, there was actually a group that reflected on this. And thanks to Tradecraft and, of course, NORSAC in Northern Ghana, they took the challenge to go with their stakeholders in Ghana for NORSAC and in Kenya for Tradecraft to see how that can really pan out. Of course, this has emerged, with a very interesting resource that will be shared in the course of this discussion. We will be talking participatory grant making this good afternoon. And of course, to discuss this with me, we have three great minds who have actually tried this out and will be sharing their experiences with us. We have Charlotte Timson of Tradecraft, we have Mohammed Awal of NORSAC in Ghana, and of course, Diana Samrasan, who will be joining us also. Let me just introduce us to the panelists of this afternoon. We have Charlotte Timson, who is actually the Chief Executive of Transform Trade, formerly known as Tradecraft Exchange. She has worked on social justice issues for over 20 years, working across Africa and South Asia, and spent a number of years living in Malawi, a dear country of mine. Her recent work has focused on structures of power in trade and aid systems, the racist underpinnings of global trade and justice for farmers, garment workers, and other marginalized communities. She is very passionate about developing alternative business models and approaches that enable a shift of power within development. Thank you very much, Charlotte, for joining us for this conversation.
Hi, sorry. Yes, very pleased to be here. Thanks, Jim. Sorry about the confusion. We were Tradecraft when we started RINGO, and as of last year, we're Transform Trade. So if that's confusing, that's why.
Oh, I see. Thank you very much, Transform Trade. And I think knowing you from Tradecraft, it's taking a while for my brain to switch very fast to the new approach or model or appellation that you've taken on board. Thank you very much, Charlotte. And we will be exchanging in this session of this gathering. Next is none other than Mohammed Awal Al-Hassan. We fondly call him as Awal, living in the beautiful city in Tamale, a very wonderful part in northern Ghana. Awal has over 20 years of active work experience, ranging from being a professional teacher to a development practitioner. Rising from a community mobilizer and youth activist, he co-founded and serves as executive director of the Ghanaian national organization, NORSAC, and was recently recognized as a civil society organization development and management experts in the country and region. Awal serves on several boards and as an accredited St. Francis Xavier University Canada trained partnership expert. He provides capacity building support to local and international organizations on partnerships and building a resilient multi-stakeholder support for initiatives at national and international level. It is worth highlighting that Awal is a seasoned publisher and has authored several articles and papers and book chapters that focus on local philanthropy and shift the power, particularly leveraging on the experience that he's garnered over the years. Awal, good afternoon and good to have you for this conversation.
Jim, thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
Great. And of course, a very wonderful lady who has accrued years of experience working on this subject matter, participatory grant making, and has even worked with colleagues to coin a new and novel appellation that we will let her give us in the course of this discussion. None other than Diana Samrasan, who is an independent consultant with expertise in disability rights and inclusion, disability at the intersection with gender and other rights, and participatory philanthropy and practice at a global level. She is the founder and previous executive director of Participatory Grant Makers, the Disability Rights Fund, and the Disability Rights Advocacy Fund, which are collaborations between donors and global disability activists to support the growth and diversification of disability rights movements across Africa, Asia, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. Dinah, so good to have you here, and we very much look forward to a very thrilling conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thanks to Ringo for the invitation. I'm excited to be here.
And we must say a big thank you to you, Dinah, because you've monitored the work of Ringo and you've expressed a fervent interest in contributing, your knowledge, your savoir-faire, and your experience with, the wonderful members of this community. And that is what Ringo is all about. So even before we dig into the conversation, if you have a thought, an experience that you think Ringo is that space for you to bring it on board, reach out to us, info@ringo.org, and we will definitely bring you on board these rich conversations. Charlotte and Awa, we are talking participatory grant making, and of course, your experience working with the prototype team in Ringo has given you that front line touch on what participatory grant making is. Can you just share what your understanding of participatory grant making is all about, given the work that you've been doing over the past few months and years? Charlotte, I will begin with you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, I think in its essence, participatory grant making is a process, and it's all about seeding decision-making power about funding. And that's the strategy of funding, the criteria for funding, to the communities that you're serving. So it's really about designing a way of working that puts communities in the driving seat. It centers their knowledge, their expertise, and it enables you to be demand-driven and responsive to their priorities and their needs. And I think, in practice, there's lots of different ways to do PGM. In Kenya, we worked with a support group, and that was consisting of community members, CBO representatives, subnational and national Kenyan CSOs, and that was the group that really co-created the process. And it was about building trust. It was about agreeing a set of principles and values that we all want to work to, with and to be held to account on, and then supporting communities in their visioning and their planning and making decisions about funding. So there's lots of different models, but I think at its core, it's about sharing power over decision-making on funding and really centering community voice.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And of course, to our wonderful audience, those who have particularly had that opportunity of, trying out this model or way of working, you can share what your understanding of participatory grant making is in the chat, and we will share with all. And I would like to move to you, Awal. You have this rich, in fact, you have a mastery of the terrain in Ghana, a country I love so much. And you've actually taken the pains to work with diverse stakeholders to try out participatory grant making. What has that informed you on about the understanding of what participatory grant making is all about? Awal?
Thank you very much, Jim, for this. And I must express gratitude to RINGO for giving us the platform to prototype PGM that we are quite convinced that to operationalize or to practice PGM, the recommendations and things we have put together could be the approach or a way to get stakeholders around a participatory grant-making model. We came into this discussion with open mind and were not prescriptive. We said we were going to prototype and we were not sure what the destination was going to be. And we wanted the voices to tell us, one, the sources of PGM. If you talk about PGM, where is it coming at all? What is our understanding of it? Is it another term coming from global north? And will the understanding be the same when it comes to global north and south? And so prototyping this, we had the feeling that understanding of PGM was going to be different at different levels. The national level could be different from the local level. But then we were so much concerned about the destination of power, because the essence of this was to contribute to shifting power. And if we did not show so much interest in the final destination of power, we felt we were not going to get it right. So we approached this at national, subnational, and community level. And it's quite interesting to see how each level define or perceive or have come to accept what PGM is. At subnational level, you will find stakeholders seeing PGM as just a platform or an opportunity to co-create solutions. Solutions that would ultimately lead to significant change. That is how people at subnational level see PGM. Do we have the opportunity to co-create? And if we are co-creating, we must analyze our context and the solution should be led by us. At the local level, where PGM, in my opinion, should facilitate or should see the ultimate and then the destination of power that we are seeking to shift. They see PGM, and I agree with them largely, as a way or a process that allows them to decide what should happen, where it should happen, how it should happen, and when it should happen. So what it means is that at each process of partnership relationship, the communities want to be part of it. They want to know who is engaging us on our issues, on our terms. So that will significantly change the power relationship that see communities as just recipients of aid, recipients of support, to becoming what? Active participants and decision makers in this space. So for Charlotte and I, this journey, we have come to the conclusion that in talking about participatory grant-making model, the principle should be that context matters and it should be driven by context. And that it should be on the terms of the local communities. And that resources should be decided, managed by the local communities. And it is not to say that global north should walk out of the table, but that there should be participants there, but of course, leaving the decision-making to the southern partners, leaving the decision-making to our local communities. I know this is one area that Dinah and I differ a bit. And Dinah, I accept it. So
thank you very much.
As intro, this is how I see PGM. And of course, the journey we have actually embarked on, how we have actually explored this particular concept. And I hope that we'll continue to discuss the concept further as we progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sezam Gule of KCDF in Kenya, says participatory grant making equates to available, timely, relevant to the social target. And I want to assume that you mean resources being available in a timely manner and relevant to the social target. Charlotte, I am coming to you. Given your journey, when it comes to utilizing this model or this approach of doing your work, why do you consider this to be a cutting-edge approach that stakeholders need to adopt at this particular moment in the ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's a good question. And, we sort of slightly alluded to some of the answer to that, I think, because it's because you are starting with community needs and priorities rather than starting with the needs and timeframes and metrics and priorities of the donor. And so what is quite exciting about this approach is if you work around and with and alongside communities, we then are having to adapt how we are working, back up the kind of chain, if you see what I mean. And I think that's what's exciting because you're flipping it on its head. I mean, our experience has been that the levels of accountability and transparency are completely transformed when you engage in PGM because you are negotiating with your partners, with communities, with the wider support group, what role you are each going to play, how you are going to behave, what principles you're going to be accountable to, what values you're going to be accountable to. And so it's a completely different way of working. It is not all about, responding to a donor kind of agenda and time frame. And that inherently shifts the power and that inherently makes the relationships of a different quality. And you enter into a much more collaborative approach. And I think it does have the potential to be transformative. And it's been really interesting in Kenya. We've been piloting for 2 years. We've just had an external evaluation. And even though it's such a short period of time and, there's so much further to go, even at this stage, there are indicators that at the community level, people's mindsets are changing. That communities are really taking ownership of their vision for their community, their plans, they're organising themselves, they are taking on new initiatives. We work with farmers groups particularly, and we've seen examples of them coming together, aggregating produce, renegotiating with suppliers, hiring a marketing person to help them sell at optimum price, engaging with government, all these different initiatives. And they're not thinking about a project. They're not thinking about a year. They're thinking long term. And they're reporting that they now feel a sense of ownership, that they feel a sense of capacity. They recognize their capacity and they're seeing things very differently, and that's been really exciting. And I think for us, we're being transformed through this process, and it's not always easy, but I think we've done as an INGO a lot of thinking about what does it mean to decolonize, what does it mean to shift power. There's so much talk in the sector, and we've been kind of thinking internally, what does it mean around our attitudes, our mindset, our systems, our processes. And that's great. And I think you do need to kind of get on the journey and have that conversation with staff and sort of prepare But it's actually only when you start putting it into practice through something like PGM that you really begin to understand the change that's needed in the way that you work. And I think that's been really great, because actually it's now that we're engaging with others and we're kind of learning from others, being challenged by others, that we genuinely are taking a step forward in terms of our own progress towards shifting power. And early days, I don't want to sort of overclaim by any means, but taking a step forward on that, in that decolonization journey. So I think PGM does have that potential to be transformative, and I think it can be an approach that unlocks change in the wider sector.
Thank you very much. And Diana, I would like to bring you into the conversation at this moment. You've had an experience with participatory grant making, and of course, you've coined out what you term participatory philanthropy. Can you just tell us, your journey in this process, how you emerged with this, terminology, participatory philanthropy, and what the nexus between participatory grant making and participatory philanthropy is? Diana?
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Charlotte and Awal, for setting me up well here. So I would just say a disclaimer. I don't think I've coined the term participatory philanthropy. It's really emerged naturally from the process of a lot of different people and organizations working towards participation more broadly within philanthropy. But let me start with some definitions. So as Charlotte said, participatory grant making shifts decision-making power about grant funding to the people who are closest to the issues that a grant maker or an INGO is addressing. Whereas participatory philanthropy addresses how a broad range of foundation functions, from governance to grant making to monitoring, evaluation, and learning to budgeting, can all involve people from outside of a foundation's board and staff. So what that means is that in essence, participatory grant making is really only a small part of broader participation by people and communities impacted by funding within the structure of philanthropy. So while there are now a growing number of funders who are practicing or piloting participatory grant making for at least a portion of their grant making budget, there are relatively fewer who are considering or practicing participation of the communities they interact with throughout all of how they function. For funders who want to address a shift in power or decolonization or localization or justice or feminism, this is really the next logical step. Because what does it matter if decisions about grants are made by members of the community, if all of the parameters surrounding those grants are still determined and owned by those in power? So the strategy behind the grants, the metrics and measurement of success of the grants, the definition itself of success, the budget for the grants and their timelines, the process of due diligence and reporting by grantees, all of the grants administration, the data about the grant making, the communications about what is being done and how and by whom, the way the funder money is invested and where it is invested. If all of this is still controlled by the donor, there's actually a very small margin for decision-making by those community members who are involved in PGM or grants decisions. So PGM is a good step, but it's not enough. That's why I've been working and other people have been working over the last few years to broaden the concept of participation within philanthropy from simply being about grant making to being about everything else. And I've been working with my colleague, Katie Love, who used to run the participatory grant making of Wikimedia Foundation and is also a consultant on participation in philanthropy, to build resources for foundations who want to move towards greater participation of the communities that they're interacting with, not only in grant making, but also throughout their structures. And in fact, at the end of October, Katie and I are launching a self-assessment tool for foundations, which we've called Advancing Participation in Philanthropy tool, which will help funders review all of their functional areas, from their governance to their monitoring, evaluation, and learning, to their grants administration and more, along a spectrum from no or limited participation to full participation. And the tool aims to spark internal discussion and aspiration within foundations to move participation of communities forward at all levels. It will be freely available to everybody at a new website, which we're still working on, but is there already. And I'd ask that somebody can put, yes, thank you, in the chat is the website, advancingparticipation.com. So I'll leave it there. Right.
Thank you very much, Diana, for those rich insights. And we invite those following to visit the website and get a feel of what this is all about. Just some very interesting perspectives being shared in the chat. And of course, our audience, often you enrich these conversations. Mais d'ailleurs, ou d'abord, tous nos auditeurs qui parlent en langue française, bien vouloir partager vos perspectives dans le chat, et nous allons faire le mieux pour partager quelques-uns, soit des questions ou des perspectives ou des expériences que vous amenez dans ces discussions. First of all, let me start with Rian Silverio, who says, among LGBTQIA+ groups, there are some models being used. For example, having an advisory committee composed of leaders of various LGBTQIA+ organizations reviewing grants, or for donors to encourage various groups to collaborate in one grant.
But the people lost Jim. Okay. Jim, are you back?
Sparkle?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, sorry, we seem to have lost Jim. Hang on a minute. Let's see if he rejoins. Otherwise, there's some great chats coming in, great questions coming in the chat. Oh, let's see if Jim will rejoin. Andrew, sorry, I'm just dealing with some technical stuff. Would you be able to just go through the questions in the chat, please, with these?
Okay, so just a few seconds. Okay, so I have a question from Moses Isoba. He says, I think, no, sorry, just a quick one. There are a few questions. So Alan Fowler says, what does Diana think about trust-based philanthropy? Is it a form of philanthropic PGM or something different? That is one question. Maybe we'll just take a few of them. And there is another one from Alex. Alex says, is participatory grant making by definition of working directly with communities, usually relatively small scale or localized in terms of impact? Is there a way to fund national level intervention through PGM? That's another great question there. Maybe you can take these two. Please, over to you, Jim. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gideon, for stepping in so smartly. Yes, I think you can take the two questions and then we come back. Thank you.
Do you want me to start, Jim?
Yes, Diana, please, you can.
So just on the question about trust-based philanthropy, I think that there are many ways that people are using terminology to refer to the same thing or similar things, and are wanting to shift power in different ways. So I think that trust-based philanthropy, which is really about better listening to communities, it's about longer-term funding, it's about general operational funding, and not micromanaging grantees, is part of what is important in participatory grant making, but it's not the same as shifting the decisions about what is going to be funded to the communities. So I do think that it is a critical piece, but it's not the same.
Okay. Yeah, Jim,
Yes,
and this is related to the second question, which talks about working through national either using PGM or any other approach is to empower communities and promote partnership. Promote partnership that respect either side of the relationship. Of course, to roll out this, you will need support groups. And so working with organizations at national and subnational level will be one of the approaches to use. What is important is how to put communities and their empowerment at the center of the work. Over.
Thank you very, very much. Just a comment from Patrick Steiner, who says, we realize as a donor that PGM, participatory grant making, is important, but we have to be mindful that we also need changes before the grant making happens, as access to us and in approaching us might be already limited, and we might be unintentionally reinforcing inequalities in the system. Thank you very much, Patrick, for sharing that very insightful and awareness-raising point that we are all taking into consideration. I can see Charlotte, nodding. And so Charlotte, tell us, let me come back to you now. What has been what have been some of the challenges you've encountered in an effort to really roll out and test, the participatory grant making approach? And what are some of the lessons you've learned along this journey? Charlotte?
Great, thank you, Jim. And I'm also just looking at some of the questions as well, and maybe I can pick up on a couple of them that are specifically about the role of INGOs, because I do think that's a really, interesting question in all of this is, where does the INGO fit? So, I mean, I'll sort of start with some of the challenges that we've experienced. I mean, I think someone's mentioned it in the chat as well. You're not starting from scratch. So we had been working with partners and with communities in a particular way in an institutionally funded program, which has a certain time frame and requirement and reporting requirements and all of that. And then we were seeking to transition out of that way of working into a very different way of working. Now, it's quite hard to just overnight go, oh, okay, now we're all going to kind of center, communities will drive the agenda and the timeframes and set the priorities when you've been used to working in a very different way. So I think kind of making that transition is quite challenging, and it takes a lot of time. And I think we can't underestimate actually how resource intensive that is, how much dialogue is needed, how, the communication side is huge. And then actually it's only over time that the trust builds. So I think, it is very much a long-term process. And that creates challenges then for funders who are so used to seeing, reports and outputs and outcomes, on their reporting cycles. And, the two just don't align very well. And that's certainly something that we found quite challenging, is that people are funding us because they want to see outcomes related to trade and development, because that's, you know, our core mission, but, you know, and not recognizing the length of time the process in and of itself takes and the value of that process. So how you kind of match all that up, I think is quite challenging. And I think there's a question in the chat about, I think from someone from Christian Aid, about, you know, is PGM just about working at a very sort of micro community level, or could you work at a national level? And I think that's quite an interesting question. We piloted in 2 counties in Kenya, and we were working with different subnational NGOs and national NGOs and the communities themselves, of course. And I think, you know, and it has been quite small scale and very localized in terms of impact. What we've realized is that actually this is a role that our partners can be playing. And so going forward, we're looking at the Kenyan Community Development Foundation taking on a lot of that community level work and actually dispersing the grants rather than transform trade. And we feel that is the next, you know, that's the right way to go. And we want to focus on what does this look like, you know, at a national and even regional level, again, working very much with partners, but focusing on, you know, our role where we can add value, be it in, you know, advocacy and facilitation, and not, you know, necessarily working at that community level. So that's a challenge we're looking at right now, the you know, that Christian Aid have raised, that I think it can work at different levels. You just have to think about the how, and then who are the stakeholders, and again, sort of think about those different roles. But I think just to recognize that, you know, we've got decades and decades of working in a particular way, and then you're trying to make a shift. And so just to be really realistic about, you know, the fact that all of us sort of can fall back into old habits and assumptions and power dynamics, and that need for the constant kind of accountability and challenge is really essential. Otherwise you sort of make a great start, and then if things start to get difficult, you can sort of fall back into assumptions over who will make decisions and you know, how to resolve issues. So those are some of the challenges that we've been experiencing.
Thank you very much for that. And, you know, we just want to go into this resource, you know, Charlotte and Mohammed, your teams worked on this approach, tried it out in Kenya, tried it out in Ghana, and documented your reflections that we will be sharing with the public today. South meets North in power shift, a participatory grant-making model, a practical resource, one that you will be receiving the link in a short while. But before we even get to receive the link, Dinah, you were not a part of that process, but you have been able to actually journey through, you know, read through this document. And it's quite interesting. It will be good to hear your perspectives. What do you think are some of the key highlights that the experiences of Mohammed and Charlotte's team bring to the fore that other stakeholders need to take on board, reflect on, and possibly adapt to suit their context to make participatory grant making work and serve as a model to promote a free and fair table for all stakeholders in our different communities? Dinah?
Thanks, Jim. And before I talk about the resource, I just want to give people a sense of my journey towards participatory philanthropy. I started building what is the Global Disability Rights Fund in 2007. So that was 15 years ago. When I started that, I had not come from philanthropy. I came from activism on mental disability rights across Central and Eastern Europe, primarily. And so when I looked at philanthropy, which was at the time very top down, with those with wealth or in leadership of wealthy institutions making decisions, it really didn't make sense to me. My question was, how does wealth equal wisdom about what to do? especially how do those in wealth or power understand the needs and perspectives of those mostly without, among whom are the majority of people with disabilities around the globe. And the hierarchy of philanthropy didn't match the slogan of the global disability rights movement, which is nothing about us without us, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, or with the mandate of the, at the time, new UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that said that people with disabilities should participate in the implementation of rights. So when I looked around and was trying to build the Disability Rights Fund, there really weren't many examples 15 years ago of different ways of doing things, of including communities in decision-making about where resources were going. But there were a couple of examples. Global Green Grants, which is an environmental justice fund, had regional advisory groups that were made up of environmental activists and scholars who nominated organizations for funding. And the HIV Collaborative Fund, which was completely run by HIV positive people. And these were good examples that I used to work with the disability rights movement and other funders to build the structure of the Disability Rights Fund, which included a global advisory panel of 12 activists, people with disabilities from the global majority, to determine where the fund would start its grant making, what size grants it would give, what priorities it would fund, how it would do outreach, and how it would make all the funding accessible to the diversity of people in the disability movements around the world. The idea was in the beginning that people with disabilities would be at all levels of the fund, from the board down to the staff and, of course, grantees. But at the very first meeting of the Global Advisory Panel, the donor members of the steering committee, the board of the fund, were not sure that they wanted to sit together with activists to make decisions. And it really took the activists presenting their knowledge, saying why they wanted the fund to give the size of grants they wanted it to give, why they chose the priorities they did, why they said that the fund needed to start in these countries, et cetera. And for the donors to recognize that they didn't have that knowledge. And that was really a turning point for the Disability Rights Fund in shifting decision-making to activists from the Global South, when donors realized they did not have the knowledge that was around the table amongst the activists. So what I see in the resource that is being published today by RINGO about participatory grant making is exciting, because it is taking kind of the principles of participatory grant making that, you know, were seeded more than 15 years ago, and the knowledge from that process, and making it accessible to a broader development community. So the resource is really contextualizing what has mainly been a beginning practice within the funding community, and giving it to the broader INGO, NGO, CSO, CBO community. I think given that there's about 5 times as much money flowing from the global north to the global south in development aid than from philanthropy, this is critical. We have to start questioning who's making the decisions and who's in the lead in terms of development financing, as well as philanthropic funding. So what I see in the guide is it really helps development stakeholders begin the process towards a needed mindset shift that is critical if we're all going to have thriving communities and planet. And it is focusing on how we do things and the who we involve. It's setting out key questions for ongoing and iterative consideration and discussion that is required if we really are intentional about shifting power.
Thank you very much. I can see, you know, your overall comments on this resource is putting a smile on our face and that of Charlotte as well. And thank you, ladies. Thank you very much, Diana, for that. And ladies and gentlemen, permit me to, at this moment, present to us the new resource, a practical resource that has been generated by actors within the civil society ecosystem that can help us to take the participatory grant making process forward in a progressive manner. South meets North in power shift, a participatory grant making and a practical resource. You have the link in the chat. You can access it, make use of it. Why not feel free to share your comments with us? Thanks so much to Transform Trade and to NOSAP for sharing their experiences with us. Thanks to the RINGO family for giving that enabling environment for rich ideas to blossom into what we have today as a new baby in the sector. One that, of course, all of us will definitely have to make use of. And this is a baby that, of course, you have contributed to bring to light within the sector. How would you encourage diverse stakeholders, particularly from your experience, because you work at a national, subnational, and community level, and of course with funders, to make this a reality? How would you advise these diverse stakeholders to come on board and make use of this resource?
Yeah, Jim, this resource is meant for all those who have development interest. It doesn't matter whether you are in the South or in the North or in between. It doesn't matter whether you have localized yourself and still remain INGO or you are a civil society organization. It doesn't really matter whether you are a community-based organization or an interest group. We all have a role to play in contributing to the shift of power. We need to empower our communities, and it's important that we look at the principles that have been captured in this document. We have come up with about 10 principles to guide in the implementation of PGM in any part of the world. We've also tried to capture voices of our communities, and the voices are quite clear. The voices tell us how they see PGM. And so we are quite convinced that it is replicable, and then the context, of course, matters. But from what we are gathering and the feedback we've got from interest groups, like the farmer-based groups, like the women rights groups, the local activity-based groups, all of them have provided their inputs and all have been captured in this document. It is practical, and we have also pointed out key challenges that one may encounter in implementing PGM. And of course, quickly intervene with some kind of mitigating measures. How to mitigate challenges that may come up when you are going to implement this resource path. So it's quite comprehensive. It's straight to the point, easy to read. The voices of Global South well captured without neglecting the relationship, the experiences that we have accumulated over the years interacting with our partners from the North. It's also instructive to observe that our partners in North are well captured in this document. We are talking about having a new relationship, a relationship that respects both sides of the globe, and that if we are able to do that and do that meaningfully, because we are actually tired of tokenism. If we do this meaningfully, how we measure change will change. In fact, who sets the goals will be clear that the goals, the purpose, all must come from the communities. And that will also influence the kind of governance structures that we put in place to promote development work in the South. In fact, that will also change in how we identify and manage risks in our program implementation. So I see this resource to be a comprehensive one. And over 180 to close to 200 participants that we have here, I encourage you to download the resource pack, give it some attention, and I can assure you that you will not regret. You will have a lot to pick from the resource. Thank you.
Thank you for that compelling invitation to make use of this novel resource. Charlotte, very quickly, coming from, your experience journeying, on PGM experience, and of course, contributing to this resource, how would you recommend we take this and make use of it practically?
Yeah, thank you. I think just very briefly, I mean, I wish we had longer because there's some really interesting discussions in the chat, but I think the key point is that I think if you are in any way involved in resourcing others in, as an intermediary or in whatever sort of structure, I think the principles of PGM are relevant. And I think that's where we need to shift so that, whenever there is resource transfer, it needs to be done in a really participatory way. And I think, for INGOs, as we're sort of rethinking our roles and looking at how we can be part of shifting the system, we always have to be saying, what is the best way that we can be playing the different roles that we play, and what are the principles that we need to be adhering to? And so I would really encourage anyone who is grappling with these questions to look at the resource and to think about how you are making decisions and who's involved, and to sort of take from it and apply it in your context, because I think it can be part of a shift, and that's what we want to see.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And you will just find on the screen the cover of this wonderful resource, and in the chat we will be sharing the link to this resource again for us to access and make use of. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Thank you very much, Mohammed, for your inputs into this process, and your teams, of course. And thank you, Diana, for taking time to share your rich experience with us over the web. Thank you, colleagues, for the insightful contributions in the chat. It's been a very bubbly room with rich insights. Unfortunately, we could not take all the questions and contributions, but thank you to Charlotte, Diana, and Mohammed for responding as much as possible to some of those rich reflections that were coming up in the chat room. Let's stay tuned to the continuation of the conversations on this community gathering. Thank you, Akanimo. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim, for hosting that insightful and very engaging conversation, and thanks to your panelists. I think one of the things I appreciate about this resource is that in as much as it is comprehensive, it is also a living document. If you look at some of the principles they talk about, it's the principle of, learning and reflecting, and flexibility and adaptability, meaning that I think, it's living, it's not static. So please, I really encourage you to check it out. Now that we know about the resource, I want to invite Deborah in to sort of summarize and set the influencing agenda, for us. Deborah, over to you.
Thanks, and thanks, Akanimo. We don't have that much time, though we are inviting people, if they want to stay on, to have a bit more of a conversation for an extra 15 minutes. But first, we need a bit of a call to action, because as you saw in the beginning, we want to make sure this doesn't stay within, the usual suspects, that we influence the system. So what does it all add up to? We heard from a wall that it doesn't matter if you're a local CBO or an international actor, these principles are important. So we call on people and the different communities we want to get out there to look at those principles. And he said, we're talking about having a new relationship that respects both sides, so which is really important. Charlotte talked about, it's all about the process, that it's all about ceding power, and it questions us from an INGO perspective, our own decolonization process, and that's what we need to shift. Resource transfer, she said, needs to be done in a participatory way. And I love what Diana offered, that's saying that at every level, philanthropy needs to include the communities it serves. So, you know, yes, you can decide on the grant size, send it out there and give a community a say over that. But what's the point? Well, not what's the point, but, you know, a deeper level of engagement would be engaging in strategy, where you're going to fund, who you fund, and how, and so on. A much, completely participatory, engaged way of working with others and the communities you serve. I'd love to hear what people want to put in the chat. What does it all mean for us? What's our call to action? What's the so what here? So anyone wants to add anything into the chat? And we've also got another set of questions. We've got a Mentimeter that we'd love you to fill out on what we've heard so far. So what does it mean for INGOs? What do we need from funders? And anything else we've heard. So can we put the Mentimeter up to see? So we've got from the discussions today, how do you envisage building on and embedding PGM into your own work or influencing others? So will you start using PGM? Will you continue using it? We had lots of people at the beginning who say, we're already doing it. Will you deepen some of your ideas looking at these toolkits and actually, or, you know, are you not sure? So we'd love to hear those bits in the Menti. So let's see what's coming up in the chat. Hafsa said, we need to reflect more to practice it. Lots of ideas there. There are lots of practical experience. AdAction has also offered a case study recently. We're hearing a group of participatory grant makers. You can see in the chat how you can join that group. So others who are still kind of some tentative, no change, not quite sure. Love to see the new start using. Would love to hear more about what your barriers are to enable you to get there. I know Patrick from the Robert Bosch Foundation said, you know, sometimes we have some practical concerns and considerations. You know, what are those? Some people I know in philanthropy or others perceive the legal barriers. Charlotte mentioned difficulty getting the funders to invest and not know the end game. How do we get to that? So I'd love to hear any more thoughts in your chat and what you want us to do as RINGO in terms of influencing this agenda to get this to be more mainstream practice. So anyone else want to add into that? It's great. Transform Trade has their case study up. I think Awal's got a case study as well, I believe. That's terrific. Any more responses coming into the Mentimeter? Doesn't look like it. That's great. Just give it one more second, and then I'm gonna hand back. If people want to stay on the call at the end to have an informal chat, especially with Charlotte, Awal, and Diana, who I think can stay on, that would be terrific. And then I'm going to hand back to Nancy as we're nearing the end of the main part of the call. Nancy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Deborah, thank you so much for that, and thanks to all the panelists for this discussion. So just to give you a quick one of next steps and some brief announcements before we end today's discussion. We are still reminding all of us to keep sharing the PGM toolkit that has been shared in the chat. Let's keep engaging. Let's keep using to facilitate the work that we are promoting on encouraging participatory grant making. We will also encourage you to still keep sharing the survey for the RINGO team to get more voices from the local organizations and national organizations across the region to facilitate our influencing work. Our work with the INGO Action Pod 2 is alive. Please connect with RINGO. If you are not part of the RINGO mailing list, kindly drop your contact, and if you want to engage with us, kindly drop your contact so that you get frequent updates about the work of RINGO and what we are doing. And also just to remind everyone who is part of the INGO Board Action Pod to watch out for our upcoming onboarding calls that are coming out in October 16th and also October 24th. Our next community gathering will come up in the next quarter. We will be announcing the dates, and that will also focus on another RINGO innovation, so that we keep on engaging with our RINGO innovations and facilitate the use and the influence of the innovation to the sector. Before I end my conversation, I would like to get a sense of how we are feeling from today's discussion. What were the key things that struck you most in today's conversation on participatory grant making? So Kat will share a quick survey link in the chat for you to share your thoughts on 4 main areas. What are the key learnings you are taking out of today's session? You also like to hear from you what action you might like to take for you to be able to see the results of your learning. What ideas have provoked you a lot today, and also if today is your first time joining the RINGO event, we want to know you so that we keep on engaging with you to join the RINGO community. So kindly see the chat. The link to the survey is there. Please share with us what struck you today the most in our conversation. We can give it, I guess we can give it about a minute or two to allow people to share their thoughts. They are just in 4 areas. What are the key learnings you are taking from this list, discussion? What action do you want to take from here? Any ideas that's really provoked you today? And you can also let us know if it's your first time. And if you want to stay connected to RINGO, please let us know and we will add you to our mailing lists, which you will get frequent updates of the work that we are doing largely and the influencing work with our funders and the INGO Board Action Pod, including major highlights coming out of the research that we are currently engaging. Okay, so thank you very much. And thanks for sharing your contacts to join the mailing lists and also for filling the short survey. So Akanimo, over to you.
Thank you, Nancy. That is a brilliant closing. We have come to the end of our section, and we want to again thank you for showing up and being part of our community. You know, it's by being together that we build community, and we really appreciate the time and your dedication and the insight and knowledge that you have shared. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us, and thank you to those who put in a lot of work to developing the toolkit. We really appreciate it.